In a school town where 80% of the population are students and people can develop powers through scientific methods called espers, we meet Kamijou Touma, an unlucky young man, being chased by several guys after getting involved in a case of a woman being harassed by one of them. Exhausted from running, he is reached by the girl named Misaka, and we find out that in fact he was not trying to save her from the guys, but the opposite, because she is a level 5 esper. After realizing that she had defeated everyone who was chasing him, Touma is attacked by Misaka's power of electricity, but she didn't know that he had a special ability. His right hand nullifies any kind of supernatural power, being an excellent shield. Although this power saves him many times, it also nullifies divine blessings and luck, making him a super unlucky guy. Until one fine day, he finds Index, a young nun passed out on his balcony. Not understanding what was happening, he takes the girl into his house, and after giving her whatever food he had in his fridge, Index tells him that she was being chased by the Magic Society because of the 103,000 books of magic she owns. Despite her belief in supernatural powers, Touma doubts the existence of magic in that world, angering Index, who shows her clothes that were enchanted to protect her, like a shield, as proof of showing the existence of magic. She explains that he could stab a knife into her and it still wouldn't cause a scratch. Doubting what she was saying, Touma decides to test her clothes through his hand that undoes supernatural powers, causing her clothes to shatter. Furious with him, Index repairs her clothing with pins and explains that she must leave before her enemies find her, as it was not safe for her to stay in the same place for long and could bring trouble to him as well. After her departure, Touma runs to his class. In the classroom, we meet Komi, who despite her childish appearance, is one of Touma's teachers. Touma spends the entire class worrying about Index, unable to understand where she kept the 103,000 magic books. On the way home, he meets Misaka again, who asks him for a rematch, indignant that she could not defeat Touma with her power of electricity, but he just ignores her and goes on his way. Upon arriving home, Touma comes across a fainted and injured Index and Style, a wizard from the Magic Society. Index had forgotten her hood at his house and returned to get it when she was attacked. Style tells her that, although he was not the one who attacked her, they had not intended to hurt her, but her protective clothing had lost its magic. Touma questions how they could chase a defenseless girl, and Magnus explains that she had read the 103,000 forbidden books of magic that exist throughout the world, memorizing every phrase in her mind, becoming a library of magic, and was in danger of falling into the wrong hands, causing the Magic Society to have to interfere. So he uses his magic to set everything on fire and attack Touma, surprised to see that the boy was still alive after the attack. He then summons Innocentius, the king of the witch hunters, a creature on fire who, despite being annulled by Touma's hand, would immediately rebuild himself and continue his attack. Index regains her consciousness and begins to quote one of the books, which explained that Innocentius could not be defeated until the runes in the environment were undone. After a larger attack by Style, Touma narrowly escapes and runs, finding the runes that Index had talked about everywhere. But as he runs away from the building, he finds that they mark the creature's attack limit and realizes he was safe. But remembering Index, he decides to return to save her. After triggering the building's fire protection system, Touma returns with water falling. While not enough to stop Innocentius' flames, it was enough to put out the rune ink around the place, putting an end to Style's magic and enabling Touma to defeat him. Later, while the firefighters were putting out the fire in the building, a girl named Kuroko talks to Misaki, who was there on a judgment mission to investigate if the cause of the fire was related to the espers. Meanwhile, Touma wants to take Index to a hospital to heal his wounds, but she explains that in her condition, she wouldn't be able to survive with normal treatments and would need to heal with magic. Although he knew about healing spells, Touma couldn't perform them because his hand would nullify the magic. She explains that she needed someone who did not possess any kind of power. Magic was created so that humans with and without powers could be on the same level and could only be used by those without powers. This made things difficult since they were in a student town that trained espers. With nowhere else to go, Touma takes her to his teacher Komi's house. There, Index explains that in her condition, she only has 15 minutes to live. Since Touma's presence could hinder the spell, he leaves the two alone in the house. Komi is still lost and not understanding what was happening. Index makes a symbol on the coffee table and uses small objects to create a miniature of the room. She explains to Komi to follow her steps precisely, otherwise, she might die. And so the two begin to sing an angelic song to invoke an angel, making a connection where everything that happens on the table happens in real life. Later, Index asks her to imagine an angel, but the poor girl has some problems and everything in the place starts getting twisted. But Index explains that they weren't summoning a real angel, but just an image of one, and all Komi should do is imagine an angel with all her willpower. And so she does, bringing an image of an angel and healing Index. Later, Komi says that as an adult and a teacher at the city school, she has a duty to solve what was going on, denying listening to Touma, who says he doesn't want to involve her in that mess and goes out shopping, leaving him and Index alone. Touma then understands better the burden Index was carrying. She explains that her country, England, is linked to magic, and so the anti-magic culture has developed a lot there, and there is a special division to research magic and create strategies against it. The Church of Necessary Evil, Necessarius. And so the church implanted all 103,000 books of magic in her brain, so that she would acquire the knowledge to neutralize any magic in the world. She continues her explanation by saying that since the books could not be destroyed by humans, they were sealed, and since their contents could completely distort the world, everyone was after the bomb she had in her brain. Touma then reassures her by saying that with his right hand's power of nullifying magic, the mages would have no chance against him. Meanwhile, two mages were watching them, Style and Kanzaki, the mage who had injured Index. After talking about Touma's power to nullify spells, they wondered how far they would have to go to prevent Index's happiness. After spending the day at Komi's house, Touma and Index go out at night, with her learning more about Japanese customs, though she can't remember what it was like in England because even though she had grown up there, she explains that she woke up one day a year ago with no memory of her past other than magic books. After this, Touma goes on his way alone. Suddenly, he realizes that there is no one else around, and Kanzaki appears, explaining that the lack of people in the place was a consequence of a rune she had placed. As Touma refuses to hand over Index, Kanzaki demonstrates the power of her magic, explaining that there would be no way for him to annul it with his hand since he needed to have some contact for it. As he shows resistance, she attacks him, and after receiving several blows, Touma, already weak, questions that if she wanted to kill him, she would have already done it. He then says that if she still had goodness in her, she shouldn't want to hurt a defenseless little girl like Index and should use her magic to protect her and not to hurt her. Kanzaki then explains that Index is actually a good friend of hers and did not intend to hurt her but to capture her in order to erase her memory. She explains that annually Index's memory should be erased so that she doesn't collapse with dozens of pieces of information overloading her brain, since 85% of it was already occupied with the books of magic. Since she had lost her memory, she could no longer remember them, and because she was being chased, she thought they wanted to steal the information she had. Touma continues to question her and the magic association of preferring to erase Index's memory instead of trying to find another way to save her, but Kanzaki explains that they had tried for a long time and suffered at having to do this to a dear friend, but they had no other choice and that if they didn't erase her memory again within 3 days, she would die. Realizing that he was not going to give up trying to stop the mission, she makes Touma lose consciousness. After that, at the place where Kanzaki attacked Touma, Kuroko continues to investigate the mysterious disasters in the city, suspecting they were being done by supernatural powers. Later, Touma wakes up and sees Index next to him, who explains that he was found unconscious in the street and was out for 3 days, the time Kanzaki said she would have to erase his memory. But, thinking that the time had passed and everything was fine, he realizes it's not true. Although she seems fine, Index feels guilty that Touma hurt himself to protect her. Just then, Komi appears saying that they have visitors, the two mages, Kanzaki and Style. Touma then realizes their plan. With his life at stake, Index would not have the courage to run away and would allow herself to be captured. The two explain that there are 12 hours left before Index's deadline, and if she ran away, they would hurt Touma and leave to come back later. The girl then faints. After a while, with Index still unconscious, Kanzaki calls Touma and explains that he would have until midnight to say goodbye to her before they return to erase her memory. Touma then suggests that instead of erasing her personal memories, they could try another way so that she could have a normal life. Kanzaki says that Index's time is almost up and they don't have time to try, because if they fail, she would die, and again asks him to say goodbye to her, hanging up the phone afterward. Not wanting to give up, he begins to research how memory loss works. After looking through some books, he decides to call several hospitals to talk to a specialist doctor, but because of the time of day, only one place answers. However, the receptionist thinks it's a prank and complains that it's too late for jokes, making Touma realize that it's already midnight. In other words, his time is up. At that moment, the two magicians arrive to begin preparations to erase Index's memory. Desperate, Touma begs them to give him some time to find another way out that would not interfere with her happiness. But Style gets angry and asks him to look at Index, who was unconscious and suffering, and asks if Touma would have the courage to leave her in that state, risking her life to make attempts and experiments that might fail, taking away the little time left to save her life. And if he was willing to take the risk, he himself could stop their mission and take the magic from the artifact needed to erase her memory. Touma, realizing how risky it really was, asks to say goodbye to her, but Style denies it, saying that they would have to prepare the ritual to perform the magic at the right time. Kanzaki reminds him of how sad they were at first when erasing her friend's memory and says that there would be no reason to deny him a moment, since they would have to wait for the right time to perform the magic. Style then agrees, and as soon as they leave the room, Index regains consciousness long enough for Touma to say goodbye and reassure her that everything was going to be okay before she passes out again. After this, He is frustrated that there is nothing he can do to help her when he suddenly questions how Kanzaki knew that she could survive only 1 year using 15% of the remaining brain. He then calls his teacher to clarify his doubts, and Komi explains that the human brain has a very large storage capacity, and it would not be possible to cause a collapse by overloading it, making him realize that the church had lied to the magicians. After wondering why Index fainted since it wasn't the overload in her brain, he understands that the church did some magic to keep her alive only if she had her memory erased, forcing her friends to help the church, thinking they were helping Index. Touma then decides to try to undo the magic with his hand to see if it would make Index wake up. After testing and nothing happening, he notices a seal inside her mouth, and as he touches the spot, he nullifies the magic, making Index wake up. But she was not normal, having awakened with powerful magic and talking about destroying the one who annulled her seal, Touma. Index then attacks him, but he defends himself with the power of his hand and explains to the mages that the church that made her a library of magic lied to them all that time. They try to stop Index, but she was extremely more powerful than all of them. But the mages keep her busy enough for Touma to run up to her and nullify her magic, which causes her to automatically fall asleep, just in time to prevent her from casting a magic that would destroy everything around. However, several traces of her magic keep falling across the room and one of them hits Tuma's head, causing him to pass out, ending that disaster with both of them unconscious. After a few days, we see that Index and Touma had gone to a hospital, and after getting better, she reads a letter to Touma left by Style that thanked him in a way for managing to save Index's memories, although he explains that the church gave orders for them to observe the situation and take it when they are ready. After reading the letter, the doctor explains Tuma's situation, who had suffered loss of some neurons from her magic and could not remember anything. Ironically, he had saved her memories and lost his. Index then meets with him, realizing that Touma really did not remember who he was or anything about his life. Sad to see him like that, she starts to cry when Touma reveals that he was joking. He says that the impact of the magic had really hit his head and caused him to lose his memory, but he used his hand in time to undo it and recover his memories, leaving Index both relieved and furious about the bad joke. But as soon as she leaves the room, the doctor appears, and we find out that, in fact, he had really lost his memory, remembering nothing but the little information the doctor had heard from the magicians and passed to him. But he explains to the doctor that he felt he would do anything not to see Index sad, including pretending to remember her and everything they had experienced together. Meanwhile, Style meets with his supervisor, who gives him his new mission. Days later, Touma and Index go for a walk together with Touma still pretending not to have lost his memories, and meet up with two friends from Tuma's school. Since Index is hungry, they all go to a snack bar, but they leave Touma in the lurch, who ends up paying for everything himself. There, they meet a girl named Asa who was remorseful because she had spent so much money on food that she did not have enough money for her train ticket. She explains to them that she is a magician, when some strange guys show up, some teachers from one of her courses, and hand over the missing money, taking her out of the cafeteria, making everyone strange. Later, on the way home, Index finds an abandoned kitten in a box and insists that Touma let her keep it, naming it Sphinx. He denies, saying that he is not allowed to have cats in his lodge, and she gets angry when she realizes she had some magic nearby and goes out to investigate, leaving Touma alone. Suddenly, he realizes that something has changed. Style has made a rune to keep people away from the place. With Touma careful that he doesn't find out about his memory loss, Style makes it clear that he didn't want to befriend him but needed to partner with him to accomplish his mission. He explains that in a school building, an alchemist named Aureolus Izzard, who had been missing for 3 years, came back and had a special girl who was able to kill vampires, being known as Deep Blood, and he was given the mission to rescue the girl. If he refused to help, they would take Index with them, forcing him to agree to cooperate. Arriving home, Touma notices Index's belly moving. She had taken Sphinx into hiding and insists that as a nun she should protect the kitten. Not having much choice, Touma accepts the animal, and after making up an excuse to leave, he meets up with Style, who was placing runes around the building to protect Index with his magic while they were on their mission. At the door of the school, Style shows Touma a picture of the girl they had to rescue, and he realizes that this is the girl he met at the cafeteria named Asa. After this, they go into the building where they find one of the church knights dead on the floor. Touma asks how come the people around are not frightened by a body there, and he explains that the place was enchanted so that the students could see neither the body nor the two of them, making them invisible inside the building. They then go up the stairs to look for Asa, but realize that the invisibility spell had broken, and all the students start doing magic to attack the two with some lights that start chasing them. They both run, but Style abandons Touma, saying that he could protect himself with his hand, even though he says it was impossible to protect himself from all the lights. Touma ends up surrounded by a student who uses magic to attack him, injuring himself with it until he loses consciousness. But before Touma could be attacked, the lights stop, and then Asa appears. On another floor, Style destroys the core of the magic, the reason the lights have disappeared. When he realizes that he had been drawn to Aureolus, the alchemist. Meanwhile, Asa used her knowledge to stabilize the injured student, and Touma says that she should run away from a place like that. But the girl explains that she has a sweet blood that attracts vampires and kills them, even though she doesn't want to do such a thing with creatures that could be good. She tells that not wanting to kill anyone anymore, she went to the city school to find a solution to her problem, meeting with Aureolus, who had a seal on the building that prevented her from attracting vampires to death. She says that Aureolus needed her to attract vampires, and that's why she went out sometimes, but he promised that no one would be hurt, and that he would use them to save someone's life, making her power that caused death be used to save a person. At that moment, Aureolus appears and threatens to hurt Touma, but Asa protects him, and the alchemist uses his power only to make Touma forget about that place and everything he saw in it. At Touma's house, Index is worried about his delay, and as she leaves the house, she sees the runes of protection left by Style, and follows the flow of mana left by the runes to the door of Aureolus' school building. Meanwhile, Touma and Style wake up on a swing, feeling like they've forgotten something, until Touma runs his hand over his head, nullifying Aureolus for getting magic. After remembering everything, including being abandoned by Style, he punches the wizard with his hand, nullifying the magic in him as well. The two then go back to Aureolus' school and see knights of the church knocking down the building, at which point Touma sees for the first time the power of Aureolus, who lifts the building back up to exactly as it was before the knight's attack. Suddenly, he hears a meow and sees Index's cat curled up in her hood, as the girl enters the building, and Aureolus makes her faint and takes her to his room in his arms. The two then return to the building after Index, and Touma discovers that Aureolus has captured her to try to save her from the burden of having her memory erased annually. Style tells Touma that year she had met with him, but last year she spent with Style, and the year before with Aureolus, but neither of them could save Index, having to endure her forgetting them. Aureolus then explains that he has discovered the existence of vampires, beings that are somehow able to accumulate a much higher number of memories in the brain than a human, and would use Asa to attract them and discover the method they use for this. If it could not be used on humans, he would turn Index into a vampire so that she would not have to suffer with her wiped memory ever again. Style then tells Aureolus that he was out of date and introduces Touma, Index's new partner who had managed to save her so that her memory would not be erased. He says that she was happy living with him. At that moment, Index wakes up and calls out for Touma. Everyone thinks she is going to say something important, but she just says she is hungry, making Style and Touma laugh at the situation. But this infuriates Aureolus, who decides to kill them both. Asa, who was watching everything from the room, says she will stop anyone from dying there, but as she was in his way, Aureolus decides to attack her first and the poor girl falls, remembering when everyone in her village became a vampire, and after killing everyone, she met up with Aureolus who seemed like a good person, since his only objective was to save his beloved. And so, she fell into the arms of Touma who rushed to protect her and managed to nullify the magic in time to save her life. With Style also wounded on the ground, Aureolus begins to attack Touma in various ways until he understands that his hand nullifies the spells with physical touch. He then uses an attack that would not work with Tuma's power, using his main magic that makes it possible to bring whatever he commands into reality, making a weapon appear in his hand. After poking fun at Touma, saying that he wouldn't give him a quick end, Style questions that if all he had to do was order something to happen, he wouldn't need Asa to save Index. Aureolus gets angry and finishes Style's skin off, making Touma almost vomit when he understands how his power to distort reality worked. Aureolus then brings out a sword and cuts Tuma's hand, making it impossible for him to nullify any magic. But instead of feeling fear or pain, Touma starts laughing and intimidates Aureolus by saying that his power was not as strong as he made it seem and did not depend on his command but on his thought, throwing him completely off balance, making him feel weak and unable to imagine any power for himself. Instead, he is terrified of Tuma's ability and begins to think of him as a monster, making a dragon appear in his hand that attacks him. Later, Touma wakes up again in the hospital when Style arrives and tells him that Aureolus would survive the dragon's attack, caused by his own fear, but he had lost his memory and the ability to use magic. With this, his course was closed, and he would not cause any more trouble. At that moment, Index appears at the hospital, and Style disappears before he can be seen. She tells him that she came with Asa, who wanted to thank him for saving her life. Asa then asks why he risked saving her, a girl he barely knew, and he says he didn't need a reason to save someone. At this moment, Sphinx jumps into Tuma's face, scratching him, and Index starts chasing the kitten around the hospital room, while Asa stands by watching the mess. A few days later, Misaka, using binoculars, tries to shoot a boy named Accelerator, but he survives, and she tries to run away from him. However, he catches up with her in an alley. She tries to shoot him once more, but the bullet hits him and returns to her, wounding her. She then tries to electrocute him with her power, and the same happens. He explains that his power can reverse the acceleration of things he touches, thus making them go the other way. With that, he touches the wound on her body, amusing himself to think what would happen if he reversed the flow of blood from her body. The next day, Touma walks to a soda machine to buy a drink but ends up putting his only high-value note in the machine. The machine not only doesn't return the change but doesn't release any refreshments. When Misaka shows up and he doesn't recognize her, since he had lost his memory, she gets angry, showing her power of electricity, making him understand that he already knew her from somewhere. She then kicks the machine, which was already old, and releases the refreshments with the impact. After discovering that he had lost a lot of money with the machine, she laughs in his face and uses her power, releasing several cans, the number he should have been able to buy with the amount he paid. But he is afraid of getting in trouble with her attitude and runs away before the machine starts beeping. She goes after him and hands over his cans, complaining once again about the fact that she is a level 5 esper and has lost to him, who is level 0, leaving him once again confused since he couldn't remember anything. Kuroko shows up and introduces herself to Touma, naming herself as Misaka's precursor, and seeing the two together, thinks they were a couple, which makes Misaka angry. Wanting to electrocute her friend, she shows off her power of teleportation, which she uses to evade Misaka's sparks. Suddenly, a sister of Misaka shows up. She was exactly like Misaka, with the differential that she wore binoculars, had empty eyes, and talked about herself in third person. Misaka says goodbye to Touma quickly and takes her sister from there, acting as if she is not happy to see her sister. Later, Touma struggles to carry all the cans but ends up slipping and falling with everything when Misaka's sister shows up and decides to help him. Arriving home, he sees Asa and Index outside trying to get fleas off Sphinx, and Misaka's sister decides to help with that too, giving the animal a light electrocution, which wouldn't affect him, but makes the fleas fall off immediately. After leaving the drinks, she leaves. Returning from class, Touma meets up with Misaka's sister again, who was taking care of a street kitten. After explaining that her electricity could frighten the animal and mentioning the various cruelties it could suffer on the street, she convinces Touma to take the kitten with him. But when he stops at a bookstore, he risks handing the cat over to her so that he can enter the store, and the animal sits quietly on her lap, despite the little electricity she says she releases through her body. Suddenly, she realizes the accelerator's presence behind her and tries to run away from him until she is surrounded in an alley. When Touma leaves the bookstore, he sees the lone kitten meowing. In this anime, by the way, lone cats mean a girl in danger. Touma realizes this and starts to look for Misaka's sister, but unfortunately, he finds her body covered in blood. He calls the police, still in shock at what he has seen, but when he takes them to the scene, the body is gone. Desperate, Touma starts running around like crazy looking for a body and ends up finding Misaka's sister alive. He is relieved to see her well when he realizes that she is carrying a bag shaped like a body. She explains that this was the body he had found, and if the situation was already strange here, it gets much worse because at this moment, several of Misaka's sisters appear, all exactly alike. She explains that they were clones of Misaka called sisters and were created for an experiment. After asking him to take care of the kitten, they all leave, leaving him alone without understanding what had happened. Meanwhile, Komi and Asa were having a quiet dinner when Index shows up to join them, since she was hungry because Touma had disappeared and left her with nothing to eat. He was very busy having to unravel yet another mystery he had fallen into by parachute, so he goes to Misaka's house to get more information. Once there, he meets up with Kuroko, who explains that they are roommates and Misaka hasn't returned yet and asks him to wait. At that moment, they hear the dorm inspector arriving, and she gets worried that he couldn't find a boy in her room. She tries to use her power to transport him but can't because of her hand, leaving him to hide under the bed where he finds a sheet that explains the sisters' experiment. He runs to look for Misaka and notices the city's propellers spinning even though it's not windy, understanding that it was Misaka's electricity that was making them spin. She remembers when she was little and some scientists appeared to her saying that her power of electricity could be used to save lives by controlling the electrical flow of her body, and so they started making clones of her, which we realized did not make her happy. At this point, Touma appears saying that she had discovered that the sisters were created for an experiment that had the objective of them dying to the accelerator, the strongest esper there is, in an attempt to make it evolve to level 6, a level that did not exist until then. She then explains that she was not in favor of that cruelty and had already tried to destroy the factories that made the clones, but other factories were built following the experiment. She says that they already calculated that she would die to the accelerator after 125 acts, but if she herself died in the first act, they would think that the clones could not reach the desired result and would cancel the project. Touma then understands that she plans to take on Accelerator and die for him, to save her sisters, and says that he will not accept her dying. He says he doesn't know any other way to stop the experiment, but just as he agreed that the sisters shouldn't die, he says Misaka shouldn't either, and they could find another way where they could all live, but she says he wouldn't stop her and threatens to attack him with her power. Touma then allows himself to be attacked by not protecting himself with his hand and ends up injured after being electrocuted a few times. But he insists on continuing on his way, causing her to get super angry and electrocute the whole place, then crying for having hurt him. When she wakes up, he tells Misaka that he has come up with a plan. Since the experiment existed because they thought Accelerator would reach level 6 Esper, if he lost to someone like Touma, who was considered the worst of level 0, the experiment would be cancelled because they saw Accelerator as weak. Misaka gets worried since Accelerator was so strong, thinking Touma would be headed for certain death, but he insists on the plan and asks her where Accelerator was. Meanwhile, Accelerator appears to Misaka's sister, the same one Touma met, explaining that her time had come. She questions why he needed that, since he was already considered the strongest Esper, but we realize that he craved power and wanted to be even stronger, as well as being a crazy, sadistic guy who attacks the poor girl. While Touma was running to save Misaka's sister, who was fighting for her life with Accelerator having fun with the situation, the three girls, Asa, Komi, and Index, were quietly enjoying a relaxing day at the spa. Touma finally arrives where the fight was going on, just in time to save the girl. Accelerator proves to have even more fun and confronts Touma without problem. But when he tries to use his power to kill him, he is furious that nothing happened. Touma flees from him and ends up in a place where there was little wind and a lot of oxygen, and Accelerator takes advantage of the situation to blow up the entire place. Fortunately, Touma escapes alive, although he is extremely weak and confronts Accelerator, who begins to get beaten without understanding why he was losing. After all, he didn't know that Tuma's power was to nullify the powers with his hand, and by not using any power against him, Accelerator was useless because he was invincible by being able to reflect the attacks he received. Disgusted by losing, he decides to attack with all his power by directing the air until he creates a plasma, when Misaka appears and meets her fainted sister who wakes up afterwards. Shortly thereafter, the Accelerator's plasma begins to break apart, thanks to the sisters that make the propeller spin, preventing it from directing air. And so, Touma takes the opportunity to throw one last punch, causing Accelerator to black out. Then, weak, Touma falls unconscious. He wakes up once again in the hospital, but this time with Misaka's sister who explains that the experiment had been cancelled, but her body being a clone needed to undergo adjustments so that she could have more time to live than had been programmed. The next day, the original Misaka shows up to see how Touma was doing, and he explains that his sister had visited him as well and comforts her by saying that no matter how many sisters had died, they had the opportunity to live, thanks to her, and that it wasn't her fault the pain they had gone through in the experiment wasn't their fault, and now she could be happy knowing that her sisters wouldn't have to suffer anymore. Later, Index shows up to visit Touma as well and bites his head off for making her worry. She later comments that he had a bad habit of getting into other people's problems and asks who he had fought for that time, but he replies happily that he fought for himself.